425 BCE, a woman is pouring wine for Sparta's most feared warriors. When her hand slips just slightly, a crude joke echoes across the hall. Laughter explodes, and then she whispers one tiny word. The hall goes silent. Every face turns toward her. Guards grab her before she even realizes what she's done. What she said wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a full sentence. But in Sparta, one syllable could get a woman killed. And what they did to her next, it is so disturbing that ancient historians debated whether it should be written down at all. Today, you're about to learn the real reason Sparta made silence a death sentence, and why this single moment accidentally triggered the first organized feminist uprising in world history. To understand why a single whispered word could destroy a woman's life in Sparta, you have to step inside a world far darker than anything school textbooks ever hinted at. Because Sparta wasn't just a land of warriors and discipline. It was a place where silence itself was weaponized. And breaking that silence meant stepping directly into the jaws of death. We begin with that night in 425 BCE, a grand dining hall. Bronze shields hanging from the walls. Firelight flickering across the faces of Sparta's elite men. Soldiers who believed they owned the right to every breath made inside that room. The woman pouring their wine, she wasn't a guest. She wasn't even a participant. She was an object expected to move quietly, invisibly, through the space. One joke, a burst of drunken laughter, her hands trembling under the weight of the bowl, and then a slip of instinct, a muttered word, barely a whisper. But in this society, where men's voices ruled and women's breath was regulated, that single syllable detonated like a weapon. The entire table froze, chairs scraped back, and within seconds, two guards had her by the arms. Her crime? Speaking during a sacred meal. If that sounds extreme, that's because you haven't yet seen how deep this system went. Because what happened in that hall wasn't an accident. It was the result of a society engineered to control women with hundreds of laws, spoken, unspoken, and brutally enforced. When you think of Sparta, you picture warriors at Thermopylae, iron discipline, children molded into soldiers. But that's only half the story. The part left out, the surveillance state built beneath it, one designed not just to train men, but to pin women into absolute silence. Historians recorded over 100 laws shaping every detail of a woman's existence. How she walked, who she looked at, where she could stand, when she was allowed to breathe loudly. At the center of this control mechanism sat the Syssitia, the communal dining halls where Spartan men ate every night. And for women, these halls were more dangerous than any battlefield, because inside them, the difference between life and death was measured in decibels. Inside the Syssitia, hierarchy wasn't just visible, it was choreographed. Every movement, every glance, every breath unfolded under the eyes of men who believed order existed only when women remained silent. And here's where the system turns twisted. Men at these meals could argue, joke, shout, even insult one another. Their voices filled the hall like a second fire. But a woman, even if she was just passing through, even if she was pouring wine, even if she was standing 3 feet away with her head down, she had to be silent, absolutely silent, not speak softly, not don't interrupt, but silence measured with the precision of a blade. A cough, a sigh, a whispered excuse me, each one was a charge that could end with blood in the river. And before you say, well, ancient cultures were harsh to women, listen carefully, even by ancient standards. Sparta was extreme. Aristotle himself wrote that Spartan women had unusual freedom in some areas. They could own property. They could inherit wealth. They could influence household power far more than their Athenian counterparts. But the moment they stepped near the dining halls, that freedom evaporated. Why? Because the Syssitia weren't meals. They were rituals of dominance, public theaters where men displayed power and women were reminders of their place beneath it. This wasn't religion. This wasn't tradition. These were political weapons disguised as etiquette, and the punishment for breaking them was engineered to crush not just the body, but the spirit. Imagine this. You're exhausted from serving the warriors all day. You reach across the table. A bowl trembles. You whisper sorry without thinking. Every conversation stops. In ancient documents, What happened next is described with clinical brutality. Historians debated for decades whether this level of violence should even be printed in textbooks, because it wasn't just punishment. It was spectacle. The woman from our opening, the one whose name was erased, her fate is carved into stone, and it reveals just how far Sparta would go to protect a silence built on fear. The woman whose whisper shattered the hall, the one dragged away screaming, never had her name recorded, but the brutality she faced was, and her story sits like a cracked fingerprint across multiple ancient texts. One source stands out, Plutarch, in Life of Lycurgus. He describes something called the Andreia, elite men's dining clubs, where power wasn't just eaten, it was performed. These weren't dinners. They were rituals of hierarchy, where every gesture reinforced who ruled and who didn't. Women who served in these halls lived in a legal no man's land. Human, yes, but treated more like shadows, technically protected by law, yet practically invisible in the eyes of the men they served. And the law governing them was chillingly clear. A woman could not speak during syssitia meals unless a male citizen of equal or higher rank than her male guardian had granted explicit permission. Let that sink in. Not unless a man spoke to her. Not unless she had something urgent to say. She needed permission from a man of the correct rank, and most of the women serving had no male guardians present, meaning they were legally incapable of speaking at all. So what happened when one of them broke the rule? Plutarch records 3 escalating punishments, each more horrifying than the last. First offense, public flogging. Exactly 39 lashes delivered in the agora while citizens watched. Not 40, because 40 could kill you. They wanted you alive. Barely. Second offense, exile to the mountains. No food, no water. Most died within 3 days. Those who lived were branded pollution, forbidden from entering any Spartan building, including their own homes. Third offense, or first offense during sacred meals, execution. But death wasn't quick. Sparta designed it to speak louder than the woman ever could. She was dragged to the banks of the Eurotas River. Her tongue was pierced with a heated iron spike. Not cut out, but pierced, forcing her voice to exist in agony rather than silence. Then she was thrown into the river to drown on her own blood. One word, one syllable, one breath out of place, and a life was erased. And according to Plutarch, this happened dozens, maybe hundreds of times. But here's the part historians quietly bury in footnotes, the part that transforms this from a story of cruelty into a story of rebellion, because Sparta's silence laws had one exception, one tiny loophole carved into the legal code like a crack in a prison wall. A woman could speak during a syssitia meal. If she was reporting another woman for improper behavior, read that again. You couldn't speak to defend yourself. You couldn't speak to ask a question. You couldn't speak to warn someone of danger, but you could speak to accuse another woman. This wasn't an accident. It was engineered. A surveillance system where women were expected to police each other, so men didn't have to. A perfect design of control through division. Aristotle hinted at this corruption without fully understanding it. He wrote that Spartan women had too much freedom in property ownership, yet simultaneously lived under oppressive behavioral restrictions in public spaces. He saw the contradiction, but not the weapon hidden inside it. Because some Spartan women saw that loophole, and instead of letting it divide them, they learned to manipulate it. Imagine you're a woman and for 100 BCE you hate this system, but every word you utter could mean death. How do you resist? How do you organize? How do you build alliances when you can't even publicly breathe too loudly? You use the only legal window you have, the accusation rule. So women began crafting false reports, but encrypting real messages inside them. The tone, the phrasing, the timing, the location mentioned. A report like, I witnessed Helen speaking improperly near the eastern wall at sunset yesterday. To male authorities, a simple complaint. To every woman listening, meet at the eastern wall at sunset. Helen has information. We know this happened because of the cryptia fragments. Secret police documents documenting an unusual spike in accusations that officers could never verify. Women were speaking more, not less, and the meaning of their words was slipping out of men's control. The system was cracking, and in 397 BCE, One woman shoved it over the edge. Her name was Aegiatis, and unlike the woman whose whisper doomed her, Aegiatis made sure her words would never be forgotten. Aegiatis didn't run. She didn't apologize. When Spartan authorities came for her after she spoke openly during a military victory feast, she looked them in the eye and said 7 words that would ignite a revolution. Then let every woman in Sparta speak. Those 7 words weren't just defiance. They were strategy. They triggered secret meetings, covert communication, and a web of resistance so extensive that historians are still debating its full scale today. But Sparta reacted with the kind of brutality that makes drowning seem merciful. The Greek historian Xenophon recorded a conspiracy later called the Conspiracy of Cynodon, led publicly by a man of partial citizenship for decades. Historians believed he was the mastermind. In 1998, Dr. Sarah Pomamoroi at the University of Cambridge revealed the shocking truth. Cynodon was just the face. The real planning and coordination was executed entirely by women, using the loophole in the Syestia laws to communicate in plain sight. Here's how it worked. Women serving meals whispered accusations. The words were legal, but their hidden meanings conveyed instructions to allies. Helots and lower-class citizens received messages. The goal? Coordinated uprisings across multiple Spartan territories to overwhelm the elite warrior class. It nearly succeeded, but as with any rebellion, betrayal arrived. A woman named Thoro revealed the names of 37 conspirators. Whether under torture or bribed with citizenship, her betrayal brought the network crashing down. The punishment was horrific and intentionally theatrical. These 37 women weren't executed immediately. Instead, they were paraded in the public theater, forced to kneel before the entire city. One by one, their tongues were cut out completely. They were released, alive, as walking warnings. Imagine the silence of that crowd. Your friends, your neighbors, all permanently voiceless, attempting to scream, but producing nothing. The intended effect, terror, but the actual effect, fragility of the system exposed for all to see. Even in brutality, the authorities couldn't maintain control. The conspiracy was crushed, yes, but the idea of resistance had taken root. The women's networks didn't vanish. They went underground, surviving for generations. The surviving women of the Crippen networks didn't stop. They adapted. They transformed their communication into secret channels, passing forbidden knowledge from one generation to the next. These weren't just whispers in the dark. They were strategic, coded systems built to outlive the rulers who tried to silence them. Fast forward to 2019. Archaeologists at the University of Athens unearthed 47 Spartan legal tablets, deliberately buried but remarkably preserved. The findings sent shockwaves through the historical community. What did they reveal? The so-called silence laws weren't about religion, piety, or tradition at all. They were political weapons, selectively enforced to maintain class hierarchies. Elite women could speak freely during the very same sacred meals where helots were executed. Same act, same location. Different social class, different outcome. Dr. Nicolo Kahlers, lead researcher, explained it bluntly. These weren't divine laws. They were political murder disguised as ritual enforcement, and the consequences rippled far beyond individuals. Sparta's culture relied on population and soldiers, but brutalizing and terrorizing half the population had consequences. Women refused to participate fully in society. Birth rates plummeted. Silent resistance became survival strategy. By 371 BCE, Sparta faced a devastating manpower shortage. At the Battle of Leuctra, they could muster only 700 full citizens, compared to 4,000 a generation earlier. The silence laws, the oppression, the fear, it had sabotaged Sparta from within. Yet the women didn't stay silent forever. Their networks, once coded through accusations, evolved into underground systems of knowledge and communication, the Crippen networks. By the time Sparta collapsed in 190 BCE, these women were among the first to celebrate openly in the streets. Ancient graffiti from 1987 reads at last, "Our tongues are our own." By 300 BCE, the dining laws had vanished entirely, but the trauma endured. Greek plays, poetry, and philosophical texts for centuries echoed with the silence of Sparta. a shorthand for oppression so severe it reverberated across generations. This story isn't just about ancient Greece. It's about control, resistance, and the power of voice. The women of Sparta couldn't vote, couldn't protest publicly, couldn't even speak freely, but they found ways to resist anyway, and in the end, they outlasted their oppressors. So the real question isn't what Sparta did to women. It's what modern societies still expect from women: silence in boardrooms, offices, and institutions of power. Control may have changed shape, but the lesson remains: voice is power. And even under the harshest conditions, resistance finds a way. So here's what the story of Sparta is really about. It was never about table manners. It wasn't about religious piety. It was about erasing women's voices from every structure of power and disguising that erasure as tradition. The women of Sparta couldn't speak publicly, but they found loopholes, built networks, and passed secret messages, turning the very laws designed to enslave them into instruments of rebellion. They transformed oppression into resistance, fear into strategy, and silence into a weapon. And make no mistake, the legacy of their struggle didn't die with Sparta. Long after the city-state fell, the trauma remained. Greek literature, theater, and poetry for centuries referenced the silence of women, a haunting reminder of the power dynamics that had once ruled their lives. This story echoes even today. Professional silence is still expected in boardrooms dominated by men. Women are still criticized for being too loud, too opinionated, or too ambitious. The methods have changed, but the goal is the same: control through the suppression of voice. Yet, as the Spartan women proved, control can never fully extinguish resistance. Even when voices are stolen, networks survive, knowledge persists, movements endure, and eventually the oppressed find a way to speak, loudly, boldly, and collectively. So, here's the question I want you to think about. What rules in modern society are really about control, not etiquette? What structures silently shape who gets heard and who remains invisible? Drop your answers in the comments. Tell me which dark secrets of history I should expose next, because every civilization has them, hiding in plain sight. If this video opened your eyes to something you never learned in school, hit that subscribe button. Next week, we're diving into a Roman punishment that was legally worse than crucifixion. Yes, it's documented. Remember, history is written by the victors, but archaeology doesn't lie. The voices that were silenced in the past often echo louder than those who tried to suppress them. And the story of Sparta's women is one of the clearest, most chilling proof that even in the darkest societies, resistance finds a way.